Maria Alvarez had spent years holding her life together with sheer determination and late-night prayers. 2 part-time accounting jobs, a tiny apartment, just enough money for rent and groceries, nothing extravagant, but enough to make her feel like she was still in control. Until the day she wasn't. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. The envelope was the same dull white as the others, bills she couldn't pay, debts she couldn't erase, but this one carried a final warning in bold red letters: vacate immediately. Maria's hands trembled as she read it. She had fought, pleaded, negotiated, promised late payments. None of it mattered. The landlord wanted his money. She didn't have it. Liam, her 10-year-old son, sat at their wobbly kitchen table, absent-mindedly coloring in the pages of an old book. He didn't know. Not yet. Maria swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to smile. "You want grilled cheese for dinner?" she asked, pretending everything was normal. Liam glanced up. "Again?" She laughed, ruffling his hair. "It's a classic." She didn't tell him it was all they had left. By the end of the week, their home was gone. Maria packed what she could into 2 battered suitcases. Everything else, the couch she had saved up for, the bed Liam had slept in since he was a toddler, was left behind. The furniture might still be sitting there in the empty apartment, but the life they built inside those walls was over. They spent the first night at a motel, using the last of Maria's savings to buy time. But time was expensive. When the money ran out, the reality she had been trying to outrun finally caught up to her. A shelter had space for Liam, but not for her. "We can't split up," she told the intake worker, her voice tight. The woman sighed, explaining that space was limited, that children were always prioritized. Maria barely heard her. The idea of her son sleeping in one place while she wandered the streets was unbearable. She took his hand and walked out, the worker calling after her, reminding her there were few other options. By the 3rd night, Maria and Liam sat on a bus stop bench, exhaustion weighing down on them like an anchor. Liam's head rested against her shoulder, his breath steady despite the cold. She stared at the street in front of them, at the headlights that streaked past, at the people heading home. None of them looked her way. The city moved on, indifferent. Liam stirred beside her. "Mom?" She tensed. "Yeah, baby?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Are we gonna be okay?" Maria blinked hard, shoving back the burn of tears. "Of course," she whispered. "Just for now, baby. Just for now." But even as she said it, the fear in her chest tightened. She had no home. No job. No plan. For the first time in her life, Maria didn't know what to do. Maria woke up with a stiff neck and an empty stomach. The city was already alive, cars honking, people rushing to work, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from a nearby cafe. She had barely slept, but there was no time to be tired. She had a 10-year-old to feed, a future to salvage. She spent the morning searching for help, anywhere that could offer food, a warm place to sit, maybe even a job. At a community center, she managed to get breakfast for Liam, along with a list of local shelters and employment programs. Most of them required an address to apply. She shoved the paper into her pocket, jaw clenched. They kept walking. By afternoon, Maria's legs ached, and Liam lagged beside her, his feet dragging. "Mom, can we sit for a minute?" he asked. She nodded and led him to a shaded spot near the curb. As he rested, Maria glanced around, her mind racing. She had never felt so powerless. No matter how hard she tried, it felt like the world had already decided she was done. That's when she saw it. A chair. It was old, abandoned on the sidewalk, one leg slightly wobbly, the fabric torn at the edges. A piece of trash, left behind like it had no use anymore. Just like her. Maria stood up, wiping her palms on her jeans. She walked over, running her hands along the wooden frame. The craftsmanship was solid, good bones, her mother would have said. It just needed a little work. She thought back to years ago, before life unraveled, when she and her ex-husband used to fix things together. He did most of the heavy lifting, but Maria had a knack for details, the sanding, the staining, the finishing touches that made old things feel new again. She glanced back at Liam, who was watching her curiously. "Mom, what are you doing?" Maria exhaled. "We're taking this." Liam blinked. "But it's broken." She smiled, hoisting the chair up. "So am I." They carried it for blocks, Maria ignoring the stares from passers-by. Finally, they found a small second-hand shop run by an elderly man who took one look at them and handed her a rag and a bottle of wood cleaner. "No charge," he said. "Just bring it back when you're done." That night, in the dim light of a street lamp, Maria got to work. She cleaned the frame, tightened the screws, sanded down the scratches. She had no proper tools, just determination and a desperate need to prove, to herself, to the world, that she could still make something valuable. When she finished, she stepped back. The chair wasn't perfect, but it was whole again. She snapped a photo on her phone, one of the only things she had left from her old life, and posted it on Facebook Marketplace. The caption was simple. "Refurbished chair, $100." She didn't expect much. But an hour later, her phone buzzed. "Is this still available?" Her heart pounded. She typed back, "Yes." The next morning, a woman pulled up in an SUV. She stepped out, dressed in stylish but comfortable clothes, the kind Maria used to wear when she still had a career. She ran her hands over the chair, nodding in approval. "This is beautiful work," she said. "Do you do custom orders?" Maria hesitated. The truth was, she had nothing. No workshop. No inventory. No certainty that she could even find another chair. But then she felt Liam's eyes on her, full of something she hadn't seen in weeks. "Hope." "Yes," Maria said, meeting the woman's gaze. "I do." She handed over the chair, fingers tightening around the crisp bills as if she were holding a second chance. That night, for the first time in weeks, Maria and Liam didn't sleep outside. The $100 paid for a cheap motel room, thin walls, stiff pillows, but a locked door and a bed. It wasn't much. But it was a start. The next morning, Maria set out with a new purpose. She wasn't just searching for food or shelter anymore. She was searching for broken things. Because now she knew, there was value in what others threw away. Maria spent the next week searching, not for food, not for shelter, but for furniture. Every alleyway, every curb on garbage collection day, every thrift store with a clearance section became a goldmine. She wasn't looking at discarded chairs or broken tables anymore. She was looking at potential. But with every small victory, new obstacles emerged. Finding furniture was one thing. Fixing it was another. She had no proper tools, no workspace, and no money to buy supplies. She borrowed a screwdriver from the front desk at the motel, used a butter knife when she needed something sharper, and scrubbed stains with dish soap she took from the free bathroom dispensers. It wasn't ideal, but Maria had never been one to wait for the perfect moment. She fixed up an old coffee table next, sanded, stained, polished. Listed it online. Sold it within hours. Then came a bookshelf. Then a dining chair set. Each sale felt like a lifeline. A few more nights in the motel. A real meal for Liam instead of whatever was being handed out at the shelter. Then, one afternoon, while Maria was putting the finishing touches on a small end table in a public park, she heard a voice behind her. "Ma'am, you can't do that here." She turned, her stomach nodding. A police officer stood nearby, watching her work. Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead. I'm just fixing this. I sell them online." He sighed. "I get it. But city regulations don't allow public property to be used for commercial purposes. If someone complains, we have to enforce the rules." She swallowed hard. "I don't have anywhere else to go." His face softened. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "There's an old garage for rent on 4th Street. I don't know if it's in your budget, but the guy who owns it, he's not too strict about paperwork. Maria blinked. A garage. A real space. She thanked him and left, heart pounding. The next day, Maria took every dollar she had, everything she had saved from the sales, from skipped meals, from pretending she wasn't as hungry as she really was, and rented the garage. It was small, barely more than 4 walls and a leaking ceiling. But it was hers. She worked harder than ever. With space to move, she could take on bigger projects, experiment with new designs. She found discarded dining tables, broken bed frames, armoires missing doors. She turned them into something people wanted. And that's when she met Tanya. Tanya had been standing outside a shelter when Maria first saw her, arms crossed, looking down the street like she was trying to convince herself she didn't belong there. Maria recognized that look. The next day, she saw her again, this time sitting outside the community center, rubbing her arms to keep warm. Maria hesitated, then walked over. "Hey," she said, holding out a cup of coffee. "You looking for work?" Tanya gave her a skeptical glance. "What kind of work?" Maria gestured toward the garage across the street. "I fix up old furniture. I could use an extra set of hands." Tanya stared at her, processing, then exhaled. "I don't know anything about furniture." Maria smiled. "I didn't either. But I figured it out." Tanya took the coffee. "And the job?" At first, she was slow, hesitant, afraid to mess up. But as Maria showed her how to sand down rough edges, how to paint in smooth strokes, how to bring forgotten things back to life, Tanya started to change. One night, as they sat on overturned crates in the garage, taking a break, Tanya spoke up. "I used to be a paralegal," she said, staring at her hands. "Had a good job. Good life. Then my ex left, and I lost everything. My apartment, my savings. People think you have to be lazy to end up like this. They don't get how fast it can all fall apart." Maria looked at her, seeing herself in every word. "You're not lazy," she said. "You're still here." Tanya nodded slowly, then picked up a paintbrush and got back to work. That week, they sold 6 pieces of furniture. Then 10. Then 20. A local boutique placed an order, 10 custom chairs. Maria nearly dropped her phone when she read the message. It was more money than she had seen in months. But there was a problem. "I don't have enough chairs," she admitted to the store owner. The woman hesitated. "Can you get them?" Maria had no idea how. But she glanced at Tanya, at Liam sitting in the corner of the garage, flipping through a design book, at the growing list of customers asking for more. And she knew there was only one answer. "Yes," Maria said. "I'll make it happen." For 72 hours straight, she worked, scouring the city for chairs, fixing, painting, polishing. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. But when she stepped back and looked at the 10 finished chairs, she exhaled. They were beautiful. The boutique owner paid her in cash. Maria held the crisp bills in her hands, feeling the weight of them, the proof that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. The boutique order changed everything. For the first time in a long time, Maria didn't feel like she was scrambling to survive. She was running a real business. Word spread. Customers left glowing reviews. Orders rolled in, custom chairs, refurbished dining sets, vintage bookshelves. Every piece she transformed felt like a small victory, proof that something broken could be beautiful again. But success didn't erase struggle. It only made the obstacles bigger. Demand outpaced supply. Maria spent nights hunting for discarded furniture, waking up exhausted, her hands raw from sanding and staining. The garage was no longer enough. Pieces stacked against the walls, tools cluttered every surface. Liam did his homework on an overturned crate because there was nowhere else to sit. She needed more space. More workers. More resources. That's when she went to the bank. She sat across from the loan officer, hands folded tightly in her lap. The man skimmed through her paperwork, barely looking at her before shaking his head. "You don't qualify," he said, snapping the folder shut. Maria swallowed. "I have steady sales. A growing customer base. I just need. You have no credit history for the past 3 years, no collateral, and you're over 40. His voice was flat. "Statistically, businesses started by women in your demographic don't scale well." Maria felt the words like a slap. He didn't see her as a business owner. He saw her as a risk. She walked out of the bank, seething. That night, sitting in the garage, she stared at the walls stacked with half-finished projects, at Tanya carefully sanding down a chair leg, at Liam sketching furniture designs in a battered notebook. The bank didn't believe in her. But she believed in herself. The next morning, Maria took a different approach. Instead of trying to fight the system that had already decided she wasn't worth the risk, she turned to the community that did. She launched a crowdfunding campaign, sharing her story online. 3 years ago, I was homeless. Now, I run a business that turns discarded furniture into something new, just like I did with my own life. I want to grow, hire more women like me, and prove that success doesn't have an age limit. Will you help me? The response was overwhelming. The campaign went viral. Thousands of people donated, women who had been told they were too old to start over, people who believed in second chances, customers who had bought her furniture and wanted to see her succeed. In 2 weeks, Maria raised enough money to lease a real warehouse. She hired more workers, women from shelters, mothers who had struggled like she had. For every broken piece of furniture they restored, they were restoring themselves. And then, one day, she got an email that stopped her cold. A luxury furniture store wanted to feature her pieces. Maria read the message 3 times. The store catered to high-end clients, people who spent thousands on handcrafted designs. Her work wasn't polished like that. It came from the streets, from discarded wood and scraps. But something inside her whispered, "You belong here, too." She accepted. 3 months later, she walked into that high-end store, running her fingers along the sleek showroom pieces, all pristine, all expensive. And then, in the center of a curated display, she saw it. One of her chairs. The same one she had rescued from the curb, sanded down with her own hands, reupholstered with fabric she had bought from a thrift store. A small tag hung from it. Handcrafted, one of a kind. $10,000. Maria's breath hitched. She had sold it for a few $100s, thinking it was the best she could do. Now it sat here, worth more than she had made in months during the worst period of her life. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even jealous. She was proud. Because if that chair could go from trash to treasure, so could she. Maria walked out of the store that day with something even more valuable than money. She walked out with proof. Proof that the world had underestimated her. Proof that she had built something real. And she wasn't done yet. Maria stood outside the luxury store, the weight of everything she had built settling in. She had come from nothing, from sleeping on a bus stop bench with her son to seeing her work displayed in one of the most prestigious furniture showrooms in the city. But success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about the people she could bring with her. She went back to her warehouse that night, the scent of sawdust and varnish thick in the air. Tanya was there, carefully staining a table. Across the room, 2 more employees, both formerly homeless, were sanding down an old dresser, laughing over some inside joke. Liam sat in the corner, flipping through a design book, his pencil scratching against the page as he sketched. Maria watched them, her heart swelling. This wasn't just a business anymore. It was a lifeline, for her, for them. Over the next year, she expanded. She leased a second warehouse, hired more women like Tanya, women who had been cast aside, just like the furniture they now restored. Every piece they worked on carried a story, just like they did. And then, one day, she got an invitation that made her stop in her tracks. TED Talk speaker, Maria Alvarez. She stared at the email for a long time, unsure if she was dreaming. They wanted her to speak, to tell her story, to inspire others. The night before the talk, she barely slept. She wasn't a public speaker. She wasn't polished. She wasn't a millionaire CEO in a power suit. She was just Maria. But then she thought about that first night on the bench. The fear. The hopelessness. The feeling of being invisible. And she knew she had to do this. The next day, Maria stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding, the audience silent. She took a deep breath. I used to think that when something was broken, it lost its value, she began. That once you're discarded, you're done. But I was wrong. She told them everything. The eviction. The chair. The late nights sanding and painting. The first sale. The warehouse. The people she had hired, the lives they had rebuilt together. And then she finished with this. Nothing is ever truly worthless. Not a broken chair. Not a person who has lost everything. Not a single moment of failure. Because sometimes, all you need is a second chance, to see what something, or someone, can become. The audience rose to their feet. Maria didn't cry, not there, not then. But later, when she walked backstage and saw Liam waiting for her, his eyes shining with pride, she felt it hit her. She had done it. Not just for herself. For everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. Maria Alvarez, once homeless, once lost, had turned trash into treasure, had turned her life into something extraordinary. And she was just getting started. Maria's journey isn't just a story about success. It's a story about resilience, about seeing potential where others see failure, about refusing to let the world define your worth. At its heart, this story reminds us that nothing is ever truly broken, only waiting to be transformed. Whether it's a discarded chair or a person struggling to rebuild their life, all it takes is someone willing to see past the cracks, to believe in the value that still remains. Now, we want to hear from you. What part of Maria's story resonated with you the most? Do you see yourself in her struggle, in her determination, or in the second chances she created, not just for herself, but for others? Drop a 2 in the comments if you loved Maria's journey and felt inspired, or a 7 if it didn't quite connect with you. Tell us why, your perspective matters. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to EN True Tales so you never miss another powerful, real-life story like this one. Natalie will be back with more incredible tales of struggle, triumph, and transformation every single day. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary stories come from the most unexpected places. See you in the next one.